Head over to miniaturemarket.com where they have thousands of board games at discounted prices, and you can sign up for product alerts. Hello my friends, it's the Game Boy Geek here. 10 years ago, back in 2012, Libertalia came out. Now recently, I did a top 100 games of all time video series late last year, and this made one of my videos. I'll put that video up in the corner there so in case you wanted to watch that, and then all the other series of those. But that game came out and I loved that game. I've always loved the Libertalia. And now, this year, 2022, Stonemaier Games re-implemented this game called Libertalia Winds of Galecrest. And they dissected and redid everything in the game. Like, there wasn't anything that wasn't touched. Now, I've already done a review of the game. I'll also put that up in this corner. But this video is for people that are familiar with the old Libertalia and they want to see what are all the little details. And they are a ton of things that changed. And what did I think about those changes? So, here we go. Now the boxes are almost exactly the same size, but you can tell there's a very different art style here. Here is sort of the darker, more Pirates of the Caribbean style look, and here is a brighter, more vibrant look, and here we have sort of air pirates. Now both boxes had somewhat of a custom insert. This fits perfect where it doesn't move at all. It has a plastic shield here to keep it from moving, where these slid all over the place, so definitely this insert is much better. Now once you get past the boards, this one did have spots for each of the individual decks and the individual coins and things like that. This one has individual spots as well, but it does actually hold some more components that we'll talk over a little bit later. It also has things for a storage tray that you can actually put out for the coins, which is really nice. But overall, definitely, this wasn't bad, but this one's definitely an improvement. Now let's look at the scoreboard. For the old version, it was a big scoreboard. It was kind of nice because it looked like a map. It was chiseled out. It looked really cool, but there's really no need for it. It actually just took up table space, and it didn't really do a whole lot because you're still converting doubloons into points essentially, or coins at the end of the game, at the end of each round. This was a cool look, but again, things have changed in times where this isn't needed anymore. You have just this. It's open information, and you use it. And the wheels, they coordinated this so that it doesn't move by accident by just touching it or doing this, and it's open information, so you're not always going like this or like this with it. But it keeps your score nicely at the end of each round. You convert your doubloons to here. It's just a lot easier. Everyone has their own score in front of them. Sure, you could look at this board and see who's in the lead very quickly. But at the end of each round, you could you could look at on the table and see what everyone's score is. Maybe you have to look in 4 different spots as opposed to looking at one here. But it saved a lot of table space. And so I actually like this better. Now in the old version, each player would get a player mat with their color and their player color cards. They would get this to put over here to make sure that you didn't take cards or discard cards over the ones that aren't out yet. This was kind of a little bit of a cool thing. This was, it was nice. I like the way it looks, but it was, it was bigger than it needed to be. It took up more table space, and these are printed here, where in the new version they're printed on the board, which I'll show you in just a moment. It did have sort of a player aid as to which phase, how you go through the phases and such like that. That could help too. But the game is pretty streamlined, so you could have a player aid in the new one, but they don't. But it's fine. It's not the end of the world. I like the art, and I like this little thing here. I kind of wish there was something like this in the new one. Now here was the board in the old one. I'm just showing you 1 day's worth of tokens here. These were double-sided almost for no reason, because when you get them, you're supposed to put them face down. And the only time it really mattered is when you had the map, if you were going to get maps for sets. But usually the maps are pretty important. If somebody got one, you usually kept track of how many people had. So it wasn't really even necessary to have these be face down. But this is sort of the smaller footprint of the board, but it did show you day goes this way, dusk goes this way. So those other player aids I was telling you about having the phase wasn't quite as important. Now here's the board for the Winds of Galecrest version. Now obviously you see it's a lot more bright and vibrant, but there's a lot of things that changed in both components and in mechanisms. So we're going to start diving into the different mechanisms that this game has as well. Now we look at the loot tokens. I just shown you some here, one of each of them. Now they are double-sided because, like we said, it didn't even really make a sense that they were not double-sided before. And they are these nice, beautiful, chunky, sort of Azul-style tiles that you will pull out of a nice bag. And it just feels a lot nicer. It looks a lot nicer. You can see them across the room better. They feel much better in your hands. Huge upgrade on the components there. Now you might notice here, we have another big mechanical difference is the amount of cards you get and the number of days in a voyage. In the first voyage, you're going to go for 4 days, okay? Now in the original Libertalia, you would get 9 cards. Everyone gets the same 9 cards. In the new one, you start with 6 of the same cards, just like before. So when you get down to day 4 and you're finished, you're gonna have, by default, you're gonna have 2 cards left over, where before you would get down and you would have 3 cards left over. Because in the older version, you'd always play 6 turns each round, where here you play 4 turns the first round, 5 turns the second round or voyage, and all 6. So it sort of has an arc, and so the number of cards you have is different. You don't just start with 9 at the beginning of the game, play 6, keep 3, get 6 more, play 6, keep 3. It's not like that. It's like you have 6, you play 4, you have 2 left over. You're gonna draw 6, now you have 8. You're gonna end up playing 5, you have 3 left over. You get 6 cards back again. And so you actually get more and more cards as it goes on. It allows the players to kind of get into the game easier, but it also gives the game a nice arc as well. Plus, there's many more ways in the cards that I'll show you later where you can pull cards back in your hand and such. So this was actually the change that I was most skeptical of, just reading about it. I'm not gonna have enough decisions in the first round. There's plenty because the cards are so much better in the new version. Now, speaking of these loot tokens, this is another huge difference. There's 2 sides of the board. This is the calm side, and then the back side is a stormy side. This is sort of a calm side. Now, each of these do different things depending on which side you're playing with. Now, when we compare the original Libertalia game, their chest was worth 5, and so is this one. On the maps, now you get 7 doubloons for 2, 12 for 3, where in the older one, you only got 12 for 3, you got nothing if you got 1 or 2. Now the relic here, you lose 3, same as the curse before where you'd lose 3. Now remember, this is the calm version. The saber here, you would discard another player's character from the island, which basically means if they're lower than you, they're not going to get a loot token that round. Where in the original version, you would discard a character from someone's den next to them. So you could really hurt someone a lot more with the one in the older version, but we're going to show you on the other side where that comes back into play here. Talked about the number of cards and such. For a hook, you can keep the character in your ship for the next voyage. So you can keep them there. That's huge to be able to have because all the cards would go away, both that were discarded and in your quote-unquote den in the old version at the end of each voyage, where now you get to keep one in there. So if you have one that has a really cool night ability or a cool end around ability, you get to keep them now. So that's really, really cool. Or instead you could just gain 2. The barrel, you'll gain 1, or you gain reputation. Another huge new mechanism in the game. The biggest problem in the original version, the one I had the biggest problem with, was the tie-breaking system. It was not good. If someone played the same card, you would look at this little number, and whoever had the highest, you'd put them in that order. It really stunk, because if you were playing in certain player games, this is didn't even come in the game. This was a BGG thing I printed out back in the day, where it shows you what number people have, their influence number, on their color, depending on what card there are. So if you're like, oh great, most of us are going to play the brutes right now, right? Well, yellow's the best brute, but they're also the best barkeep and the best preacher. And certain colors were definitively better than other colors if a certain hand was dealt. This tiebreak system was not good. They completely redeveloped this for the new version, and it's awesome. It works so well. Randomized tokens, regardless of the amount of players, you'll put them all out here. Where you are tells you how many doubloons you get at the beginning of each round. Instead of just getting the 10 as normal, the higher you are on reputation, which is better for tiebreakers, is 7 all the way down to 12. So right now, if these 2 players played the same card, well, purple's goes ahead because they're higher in reputation, but they got less money at the beginning of the game, which essentially is points. Plus, cards will allow you to move up and down in reputation. Like if you move up in reputation, you always go like this. And it's clever that all of these are used regardless of the amount of players. For example, this one allows you to gain 2 reputation during the day phase and does some other things, and we'll go over this later. The bandit, move to the leftmost space on the reputation track, gaining 1 doubloon this way. So if this one wants to go all the way to the end, wow, 1, 2, 3, they're getting a bunch of doubloons. Now you can flip the new board over. Now it's no longer calm, it's stormy, and this has all to do with what the different loot tiles do. So now they do all sorts of different things, like the chest. At the end of the round, you gain 4 plus 1 for each of your map tokens. A little bit more comboing going on. The barrel, you can discard this token and gain 2 reputation. Great on the tiebreaker scale we just talked about. And then you gain 2 at the end. The hook, discard this the character that gained this token. So you don't want to get a hook if you've got someone that has something good on there for like an end of round ability. Discard a character of your choice from any adjacent player's ship. This is basically the same thing as the very mean saber in the original version. Now the relic, at the end of each night, you lose a doubloon. Amulet, at the end of the round, you gain 1 for each reputation token to the right of yours. Very interesting. So this one, you get amulets, you're actually gaining them for less. So you might combo it together, go all the way down the reputation track if you're collecting a lot of amulets. Again, more comboing. The map, if you have more map tokens than any other opponent, you gain 8 and discard your maps. Otherwise, you keep them for the next voyage, trying to get things like that. But the coolest thing is you can play in sort of a hybrid version, like called Uncharted Waters, where maybe you want to play with mostly stormy abilities, but some of them you want to make the calm, which are the ones on the other side. You can replace those on here, so you can customize each ability to be the stormy side or the calm side with the tiles, which basically have them, they're double-sided. They have the calm on one side and the storm on the other. So you can totally customize each of the abilities to either the calm or the stormy side to make it so that it fits your game group's desire. Now, after cards come off the island, they go into your ship, which is just in front of you. But when cards get discarded, especially at the end of the round, they go face down into your graveyard. They just go on this little tile right here. Now, in the old version, once cards were discarded at the end of the round, they'd all be gone out of the game for the rest of the game. Where now you have cards that can actually get them out. Return a character from your graveyard back to your hand. So this could be a round or two later, you're able to play this card and get a good card back that you want that you couldn't do before, because the original Surgeon only allowed you to take it that was discarded that round. So there's a lot of differences. Now we're going to start getting into the cards of the differences as well. But before I get that, let's talk about some of the other mechanical changes. There's also a 2-player variant that uses a midshipman board. And the player whose character is just to the left of the midshipman has a loot token removed by their opponent. And if you're the only one to the left of that, you must put your character right next to it. Meaning if someone is higher than the midshipman and someone's lower, that lower player isn't going to get a choice because there will only be 1 loot token left at that point. That gives you lots of great decisions when trying to figure out what to leave for that player or not. There's also a robust Automa solo mode where a randomized card will come out as a pilferer, which isn't a player but just acts as a card, but also depending on the tokens that are there for that day, that will select a specific card for the Automa. And then play will resolve as normal, but the cards have specific Automa abilities. And some of the tiles do as well to tell you what those specific loot tokens do in the solo game. Now we're going to do a deep dive in the differences between the cards, their abilities, new cards, ones that were redone. Obviously the first thing you're going to notice is the art is completely different. This is the more old style, traditional, sort of dark pirate version, where the new version is much more, again, vibrant, and they're all anthropomorphic animals there. Very different themes and tastes there, and you're probably going to either love or hate one or both of these or whatever, but they are definitely very different. Now there's 2 cards like this, the number 1s and number 4s, that were exactly the same, it looks like, from both numbers and abilities. They both did the same thing, but again, that's the difference in the art. Now the majority of the cards are very similar, but they're changed slightly in either abilities and or numbers. Where the beggar, same number, same ability, but now instead of just gaining the 2, instead of gaining the 3, they giving you 3 doubloons, they give you 2 doubloons, but you gain a reputation. Again, a way to balance sort of that tiebreaker mechanism. Cabin Boy's the same number. In addition to doing what it did before, it also, if it's the leftmost character on the island, gains 3 doubloons. So it makes it even a little bit more powerful. Now there are some new cards in there, so some of the numbers are slightly off, but they've balanced them as well. So the Preacher is a 1 number higher, and you still get to just keep 1 loot token, but you gain 1 reputation for each of your discarded tokens. So that's even better because you can gain reputation that way when that happens, and you gain 6 instead of 5, so slightly different and rebalanced there. The Barkeep, same name, just off number by 1, again, because there was another card added there that made it go up. But we have the Knight, you gain 1, same as here, but at the end of the round, you gain an additional 1 for each of your barrel tokens. Again, another way to make it more interesting where you're trying to do set collection and comboing with the cards. Now these 2 cards are not quite the same, they're quite different actually, the Waitress and the Explorer, but they're somewhat close, where before in the Knight, you could discard a treasure map to gain 3 doubloons, where now on the Dust phase, if you gain a treasure map, you gain 2 reputation. Somewhat similar, but they changed it quite a bit, and then at the end of the round, 1 of your map tokens counts as 2 map tokens. That's great, and if you remember, the 2 map tokens you actually get 7 doubloons for, so a little similar, but definitely very differently developed. The Carpenter here, same exact abilities in both stages, but the numbers are slightly different, so went from a 9 to an 11. Now the French officer went to the officer moved from a 10 to 12. It used to gain 5 doubloons if you have less than 9 doubloons. Now, if you have 12 or more doubloons, you gain 2 reputation, again, the tiebreaker. Otherwise, gain doubloons until you have a total of 12. So, similar idea, but different, more refined, and again, it helps with that reputation. The Mutineer is pretty much the same except the numbers. It went from a 13 to a 16, but the ability is exactly the same. Now the Brute went from a 14 to a 17. The ability is the same except the character that gets, punched and gets removed, that player gets 1 reputation, so it helps on the tiebreaker. Now the Gunner, again, went from a 15 to an 18, and it's somewhat similar. You used to pay 3 doubloons to discard a card from a player's den. Here is discard a character of your choice from any ship, which is the same thing, but if you choose an opponent's character, you lose 1 reputation. If you choose one of yours, you gain reputation. Again, better decisions, and it all has to do with the tiebreakers as well, which also is how much money you get at the beginning of the round. Now, this one went from 12 to 20, and they renamed it from a freed slave to a freed prisoner. I like that change. And then here at the end of the night, you gain 1. But if you ever gain 3 or more, then you discard the freed prisoner. So because there's a lot of ways to get cards back in and doing different things, so they didn't want this to be too powerful. But it is a 20 instead of a 12 because it is more powerful. Now this one is actually the exact same ability, but it went from a 19 to a 21. Now this one, the Cook went from an 18 to a 26. You used to just take an extra tile. Now, unless you first gain a hook token, you gain the second loot token from it. So you can't get 2 if you got the hook, for example. The Armorer went from a 20 to a 28. You used to gain 1 doubloon for each of your sabers, and then here, if you gain a saber or a hook token, you gain 2 reputation, another way to mess with that. And then at night, you still gain 1 for each saber and each hook you have in your ship. So it's definitely more powerful, and that's why it's a 28 instead of a 20. The Merchant went from a 21 to a 30, and you used to discard 2 identical booty tiles to get 3, or 3 to get 5. Here you can discard 1, 2, or 3 to get 1, 4, or 9. So a little bit more flexibility, and it's a little bit more powerful, but the number's more powerful as well. Now the Surgeon went from a 22 to a 31, but this allowed you to take the character from your graveyard, which, as I showed you earlier, you can get them out in a future round, where before they were gone, and so it was only ones that you can get back this round. This one you can get some from previous rounds, which is why it's more powerful. Now the Treasure went from 23 to 32, and essentially it is the same ability. You get 1 for each of the, before it was goods, jewels, and chests, and here it's each barrel, amulet, and each chest. So pretty much the same thing. Now the Gambler went from 24 to 33. The day ability is the same. You lose 1 for each of your loot tokens that you have, but you'll gain 6 instead of 9 as before. Now the Governor's Daughter 25 went to 34, the Aristocrat. You used to gain 6 doubloons if you're the only one to have the Governor's Daughter. Otherwise you'd pay 3. Here in the daytime you get 2 reputation, tiebreaker. Then if you're the only player you'd get 5 or lose 3. So they changed it out a little bit. Quartermaster went from 26 to 36. The day ability is the same. You'd gain 1 doubloon for each of your loot tokens, but here you would lose 8, and now you only lose 6. This was one of my favorite cards from the original, the 27 Granny Wada, turned to 37, the Wind Nymph, where you gain 2 if you're the only player with Granny Wada in your den. Otherwise, you discard all of the copies, and it's at night, and it basically does the same thing. Number 28, the First Mate, became number 38. The end of the round ability is the same, but in the daytime, the new one, you'll lose 1 for each character in your ship. 29 Captain became 39 Captain. They're changed quite a bit. It used to gain 3 doubloons in the day and then lose 3 doubloons for each of your cursed relics, where now you advance to the rightmost space on the reputation track, lose 1 doubloon for each position gained this way. So completely different, but it has all to do with the tiebreaker. The Spanish Governor, with 30, came the Governor, 40. Same thing, except you'll gain a reputation for each character discarded this way, so you're better on the tiebreaker. Now the Topman changed from 16 to 24. You used to gain 5 doubloons if you're the player with the fewest characters in your den, and that was once at the end of the round. Now, at the end of each night, you gain 4 doubloons, then lose 1 for each character in your ship, so this is better to play earlier, and it happens every night. Now, there are a total of 40 cards instead of 30 in the original, and some of the cards are brand new that have nothing to do with any of the previous characters, like number 2, the Apprentice. You get to use the daytime ability of a character in your ship. That's awesome. You can reuse something of somebody you already used once. Fantastic. Maybe you use the brutes, if you will, and knock another player out. Where the Bandit is, you move to the leftmost space on the reputation track, gaining a doubloon for each one you went past. The Stowaway, you get to gain a random loot token from the bag, and if it has a dusk ability, you resolve it immediately, then discard this card. The Smuggler allows you to gain a loot token from the current day, but you get to do it during the day phase before everyone else gets to do it, and then you place this right in your ship. So you kind of get to steal it, hence the Smuggler. The Bodyguard gets to discard all Saber and Hook tokens from the current day and gain 2 doubloons for each token discarded this way. With a Witch at night, you get to copy the night ability of any other character in your ship, and at the end of the round, if the Witch is the only one, you basically put it back into your hand. That's really cool. The Necromancer allows you to discard one of the bad purple relic tokens, and then if you do, you return a character from your graveyard to your ship. So you pull out from being dead, boom, now that you got it, maybe it's a good night ability, maybe it's a good end of round ability. Really cool ways to combo things together. The Brawler, you discard a Brawler from an opponent's ship, and if you do, you gain 2 reputation. Otherwise, at the end of the night, either way, you're going to gain a doubloon. We also have the Thief, where you take 1 loot token from an adjacent player's ship, and if you do, you lose 2 reputation. The Recruiter allows you to play a character from your hand directly to your ship. Really cool. You get the ability you really need right now. The Watchman, you can switch a loot token from the current day with one from the next day, if possible. The Infantry is, if it's the rightmost character on the island, you gain 5 doubloons, meaning if it's the highest one played. The Collector, if you have 2, 3, 4, or 5 different types of loot tokens, you gain 1, 3, 5, or 10 doubloons. Now, because there's 40 cards, you could literally play 2 games of this in a row using all different cards each time and never see the same card twice. Now, I believe there were 3 cards that were completely removed from the new game. The Monkey, which everybody hated the Monkey. Transfer all your cursed relics from your den to the player to your left. It was such a mean card, but it was just one that was very situational and it was very mean, and it's gone. The Voodoo Witch, you gain 2 doubloons for each of your discarded characters. And the Spanish Spy had to do with the Spanish officers, which are not part of the loot tokens in the new game. So I could see how that worked. All right, kudos to any of you diehard OG Libertalia fans that stuck through that whole entire overview detail of, card for card ability, comparison. Let's first start with the insert. As I showed you, both of them had custom inserts. However, I will say that the Winds of Galecrest wins this one. I walked this game to a cafe recently, put it in my bag, and it was the only thing in that bag, and it was standing straight up, and it was flopping around all over the place, and that insert kept everything perfect. Not one thing was out of the way because of that nice insert plastic clear piece, the way the board, it's all nice and tight. And it just has more compartments and more things that are better about it. The other one had a good insert, but this one gets the nod for Winds of Galecrest. The coins, as I kind of showed in the overview there, the coins themselves, I liked the original ones were fine, but the newer ones are better because they have those different sort of like off, they're not symmetrically round, right? They look like sort of aged coins. They have those different shapes of them. And the valuations of those, instead of having 1 5s and 10s, having 1 3s and 5s, I found myself making change a lot less in this game, and it just makes the game a smoother play. So Winds of Galecrest wins the coins. The scoreboard. The old scoreboard was fine. In fact, I showed you that I actually loved the way that it looked cut out like a map, but quite honestly, it wasn't needed. It just took up a lot of table space, and now those little dials, it's always fun having your own little scoreboard, having the little dials. It's thematic with the treasure chest. So I like the Winds. I was afraid I was gonna have trouble like seeing other players' scores, but you really only look at them like once per round after everyone scores. Okay, what do you have? What do you have? And usually just announce it anyway. But it's kind of fun just being able to make your own score there. So Winds of Galecrest wins that one because you're opening up the table space for more players to sit around the table. The player aid. The player aid in the original I showed you had nice art. I loved that. It had the flow of the game, and it also had what the abilities did. Now in this one, there's a player aid, but it's only for the solo version. In Winds of Galecrest, this is the one. This thing I think the first edition was better in. I would have liked to have seen even just a card the same size as the player cards that would have had the calm abilities for the tokens on one side and the stormy abilities on the other side. Now granted, if you're playing Uncharted, you'd have to sort of flip back and forth. But if you're playing Uncharted, you probably don't need a player aid anyways because you probably know the game well enough. But it would be really nice to just have that there. Sure, they're printed on the board. Sure, there's extra tiles so you could put them in front of a new player. But if you have more than one new player, it really should have had a player aid. It's just one card. So for not having it, player aid goes to the first edition. The loot tokens. Oh my gosh. Absolutely no brainer here. Winds of Galecrest kills it in this. Whenever you're pulling those Azul style tiles out of the bag, it just feels good. They clink around. It sounds good. They're double-sided. It looks great. way better than the original. Having those things one-sided was stupid anyway, because like the only thing you want to hide is a map, but maps were so important. If someone took one or two, everyone at the table knew, because you were making sure they weren't getting a third. So this was our biggest no-brainer. Winds of Galecrest wins the loot tokens. The tie-breaking system. Oh my gosh, I hated the original tie-breaking system. Hated it. It was the worst. You could grab a deck against somebody else knowing that certain cards that were super powerful that you had the advantage of from another player. It just didn't work. This new tie-breaking system is amazing. The way it balances the starting doubloons with where you're at the reputation, and it's the tiebreaker. But the coolest thing about this is that it's not necessarily always good to be high in reputation. You might have cards like the Smuggler, who's actually better when you have less, because you might have multiple players playing the Smuggler. Whoever has the less reputation, who's the worst reputation, is gonna get the first ability to steal the loot token. So some character abilities do better when you have less reputation, or some of them do better if you have more. And I love that. It's baked into a lot of the abilities on the cards. No brainer. The tie-breaking system is fantastic here. I had read a lot about tie-breaking systems with a hook and variants that Palomari put out a while ago. None of those all paled to comparisons to what this thing does. Winds of Galecrest crushes it with the tie-breaking system. The depth in the comboing is much deeper in the new version. There's just a lot more going on with, hey, I'm going to do this, it's going to help me in reputation, and it's going to allow me to do this. There's just more opportunities between the abilities of the tiles that they've changed, of the loot, and the abilities of the characters and the way that they interact with each other. There's way more abilities to do some really cool combos. So the depth and the comboing in the game is much better in Winds of Galecrest. The structure of the game. This is one where, this was the thing I was most skeptical of when I was reading about the new Libertalia, is I was like, oh wow, you don't get 9 cards at the beginning and then play down 6 of them until you have 3 and then do it over and over. You're gonna have less choices. It's not gonna feel as deep and as long. This was something that I had a preconceived notion on that got completely flipped upside down, because I gotta tell you, it works great. Having 6 cards at first, there's already way more enough to think about in that. And you're only playing 4 of those and you have 2 left over. But each voyage, you're getting the same amount of cards, 6. So you actually start with a smaller hand, but it grows and it grows to give the game a fantastic arc. And the reason why it doesn't really get affected a lot, because there's a lot more ways to bring characters back in. There's the Surgeon, which you could do before, but you could only do that in like that round before. Now you can bring the Surgeon back from players that were killed rounds ago. There's another card, I can't remember the name of it, but you can also bring another character from the back, the Necromancer maybe, I forget the name of it. But there's more ways to bring it up. There's more ways to keep cards in your ship, like the hook in the hook ability in the comm version. So there's more ways to gain cards and keep cards. So not having that gives the game as much, if not more depth, but with having a better arc and an ease of playability getting into the game. Structure of the game, Winds of Galecrest crushed it on this one. The graveyard versus the discard pile. I always hated the old version. It was very confusing about it. You have the other things here, then they get discarded, and everybody that's discarded gets moved out of the game. Where now you have that graveyard when cards get discarded, and as I just mentioned, there's multiple ways to get those, and the graveyard lasts the whole game. So it gives you a lot more abilities, a lot more decision space to do different things with characters that have been killed, much more than the original. Winds of Galecrest wins this one. The 2-player experience. I didn't dislike the original Libertalia experience. It was fine, but it wasn't a game that I was like, oh man, 2-player game, let's play with Libertalia. It wasn't like where it shined. It always shined with more players. And I would say that probably the new one also shines better with more than 2, but the 2-player experience is so much better. Winds of Galecrest kills with this. It takes that 2-player game, and essentially at times, if you've both played cards lower than the midshipman, it becomes an I split you choose, where the person who's lowest is gonna pick one to remove for the player right before they take it. So you're splitting, taking things out, but the other player gets to choose first. It's just a brilliant mechanism that makes this 2-player experience excellent, where I would actually search out this game to play with 2 players because I love the game so much, and the 2-player thing's amazing. Solo experience. The original didn't have it. This one does. Winds of Galecrest wins this because the solo, and I did play the solo variant, and I'm not a big solo physical game player, but it worked well. You had sort of the automa that you know which card they're going to take that round depending on what the loot tokens are, but you don't know what the random card from the pilfer is going to be, and it just works. You have a puzzle, you can figure things out, but you're not always 100% sure where you're going to land because of that pilfer, and it works really well. So the solo version, Winds of Galecrest does it. Variability and replayability. While the original had 30 cards, the new one has 40 cards with a lot of new ones. You could play through the game 2 times in a row and never see the same card twice if you just rifle through the deck. And you still have cards left over that you haven't seen. You can't do that with the original. So replayability and variability, and because you can change the loot tiles and change their abilities to what you want, this game has literally unlimited replayability with the new version. It's much better. The art. This is something that I've actually changed on. I've always loved the art in the original. Always loved it. I just thought it was so cool, that old, like more historically themed, or I should say traditionally themed pirate art. I've always really loved it. But it was darker, it was, you know, Caribbean, it was Pirates of the Caribbean looking. Now, the new art, when I first saw it, I was like, okay, I like the vibrant sort of fresh look of this. But when you go from those old characters that you really love the way that some of them look, and you look at these anamorphic animals, I can't say the word, sorry. At first, when I was looking at the art, I was like, I wish they would have gone with the older art. But I've got to tell you, the newer art really has grown on me, to the point where now that I've had the game, and now that I've gone through the cards in detail, and now that I've played with it a ton of times, and now that I've actually looked at them side by side, you know what? I actually have turned around and I really do like the new art, and each time I play it, I like it more and more. The art of the actual characters is larger. The older one, they were smaller and in the corner, so they could have the text. But in the new one, the text is white, black and white on the bottom. So they have more card area for the art. So the art's bigger. The art is actually more detailed. It's more colorful. This is very subjective. Some people I've seen online hate the new art. I didn't hate the new art right off the bat, but I was quite skeptical that I liked the old art better. But I gotta tell you, it really has grown on me. Looking at the detail of the characters, looking at the little things, the colors, and now looking at them side by side, I'm almost to the point where I like Galecrest art better, which I never thought I would say. But at this point, I'm just going to give it a tie, because I'm like at that point where Galecrest is sort of caught up, and I'm like, well, I like them both for different reasons, because they are both very different. But I definitely didn't like Galecrest at first until I got it in my hand and experienced it over and over again. So clearly, the only thing that the first edition won for me hands down was the player aid, and that's an easy thing to fix. But other than that, Libertalia, every ounce of this game that was redesigned, redeveloped, was for the good of this game. And it took a game that was in my top 100, I think it was 78 or 77, and this version of the game would fly this way up, way higher than it was on my top 100. This game's fantastic. If you're someone that has the old Libertalia and you're wondering, should I get rid of my old Libertalia? I would say you would be kind of crazy not to. Other than the fact, if you absolutely detest the new art, you're like, I'll never play a game that's about pirates and is vibrant, then you're not going to like it if that's what's going to hold you from liking it. But if you look from a mechanical standpoint and just everything about the game, it is better in every single way. You'd be crazy not to take a game that you love and play one that's like way better. I will never play the old Libertalia again because of this. That's how good this game is. And if you're a person that has not played the old Libertalia and you're just watching this because you're just curious, well, there's no reason to get the old Libertalia. Get the new one. It's so much better, again, unless you are so strongly against the new art. But even if you're doing it, you're doing yourself a disservice because the new game is so much better. Libertalia, Woods of Galecrest, crushed it. Game Toppers not only transforms your existing table to a high-quality gaming solution, they now offer full leg kits and dining cover solutions for the full table application. Paired with their amazing, thematic, premium stitch edge mats from noted board game artists like Vincent Dutray, collapsible cup holders, and really cool accessories, it's a complete system that upgrades every game you play. Go to GameToppersLLC.com or click the link below.